Lucky to Be Here is a podcast that showcases the lives and experiences of those who took the leap and navigated big life and career transitions across countries. They share their stories, their lessons, and advice to show us what is possible and what it takes to define and live their idea of success across borders. Because we all need that extra nudge to make our next bold move and build our paths one day at a time. We're more than just lucky to be here. I am Dr. Analia Gomez Vidal, and I know a thing or two about big leaps and career pivots across countries. I am the founder of AGV Services LLC, a career development business that empowers bold career explorers, creating their paths across industries and countries without self doubt or overwhelm. To learn more about the work that I do and how we can support you through coaching and community, visit agvservicesllc.com. Welcome to Lucky to Be Here. I am really glad you are. Welcome to Lucky to Be Here. I am very excited to welcome Veronica Bianchini. Veronica was born in Argentina in a multicultural household of first generation immigrants. After graduating as a political science major, she transitioned to a career in market insights, and she has been living in London for the past 10 years, where she has worked in market research, consulting, and now in tech. So, Veronica, welcome to Lucky to Be Here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Analia. Thank you for having me. I'm very glad to be here talking to you.
Me too. To get us started, what is your story?
Well, it's a great question. And I think that to answer that, I need to start with my family story because I think this is an intergenerational story for me. I was born in a first and second generation immigrant household in Argentina. My mom and her parents were born in Croatia, and they literally escaped from what was then Yugoslavia when my mom was 2 years old. They lived for a couple of years in a refugee camp in Italy, and eventually made it to Argentina, where they established themselves. And on my dad's side is a very interesting mix of half Italian, half Spanish household that had moved a little bit earlier than my mom's family, right before World War II, in a very precise decision to exit from Europe in the year 39. So talk about timing. They both met. My parents met in Argentina, and yeah, that's where I was born. And my story starts there, and in this very unique upbringing, which was always slightly different from everyone around me. For example, my parents didn't really watch football, which in Argentina is almost like the official religion.
Yeah.
Or we ate like different kinds of foods, right? Like we would eat goulash or I don't know, sauerkraut, things that are very, very traditionally European food staples. So that's how I grew up. That's part of my upbringing.
It's so interesting to hear because, especially as we talk a lot about the experience of being an immigrant, being an international student, worker, and so on, like so much of it starts very young. And so, related to that, I guess like the next question to go a little bit deeper is what motivated you to move abroad?
Yeah, so that's when the story starts becoming my story, right? Uh, there's a lot of motivations behind my move. So I've lived in different places. I guess I never felt 100% like I was in the right place for me growing up, and partially my story has been a story of trying to find that place for me, and almost like a search for identity in a way. I lived for a short spell in the US while I was studying. I lived for a short spell in Brazil after I graduated. And eventually, 10 years ago, I moved to London, originally to study as well, but I stay here. I'm on my 10th year in London and have my citizenship, my house. And it's the most I felt settled in a place in a while. And there were two reasons for me to move, right? The first one was this search, right? Search for identity, search for a place where I felt like I belonged. And then there's also more practical reasons. Argentina is a particularly difficult country, especially if you're an ambitious person that wants to build a career for yourself. Um, I'm sure there were perhaps ways of achieving that back home, but back then when I was 28 and I decided to move to London, I just couldn't see it. There was several reasons where that would make me feel that I was stuck at that point in my life. The work was not going the way I expected it. My friends were also leaving to follow their own dreams abroad. That definitely inspired me to that possibility. Even like in my personal life, I was feeling that dating was not working for me in Argentina. So it was like all the combination of factors that um kind of pushed me to try something different.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you have a recollection of a specific moment where you were like, this is where I'm heading next?
Yeah, so I had a couple um of potential countries or potential destinations in mind. And back then I was studying French because like I've always been curious. I've always like different languages. I've always liked studying. And the original plan was to move to France. And at some point I just realized that I could not speak French at all. And I had been studying it for like 4 or 5 years. And I was like, and not just not being able to speak, but just I'm not really enjoying all the cultural aspect of the French lessons the way that my other classmates were enjoying them. They were like, "Oh, I watched a French movie on the over the weekend," and I was like, "I watched like the latest detective series on the BBC." Right? So that gave me a clue that maybe I was heading to the wrong country. So I pivoted. One of my very good friends from school was just getting accepted into Southampton University. And that kind of like inspired me again to, oh, well, what if I look at, masters in the UK instead? And I convinced myself that that made more sense for me. And it actually did.
It's very interesting. As someone who did study French and then like went to Paris for a while, I can still see why that might have been a wise decision on your end.
Yeah.
As I related to that, and this is something that I know like we have touched on in the past in part as part of our conversations. Um, there is a big element about kind of like the cultural aspect that goes into navigating life as an expat, an immigrant. And so I I wanted to ask you a little bit about what you have felt have been like the most challenging aspects of following this path so far.
Yes. You never know what you're going to get when you leave your country, right? It's the biggest challenge is culture comprehends so many different things, right? It's not just learning the words of another language. It's not just finding your way around in a city. That's kind of like the tip of the iceberg. It's all about the nuances and those cultural cues that take the most of your time and effort. Um, for example, in the UK, there's almost like this internal jokes that, well, but it's true, but the locals are not very direct. So when you're working, you don't get direct feedback, right? It's very rare that your manager would tell you this is wrong, or you shouldn't, or don't do this, right? Or do A instead of B. You usually will hear feedback in a very tangential, convoluted way. Like,
Mhm.
This is fine. What maybe I would do instead is, and you would think that that's a it's not a suggestion. Like that is, if your manager is saying that, and you like the voice raises like an octave, that's an like it's a very polite order, right? So those are the kind of nuances you have to learn.
Hmm.
And other stuff like redefining what success looks like in the place where you move, right? And it's some of the things that some people really struggle to get is getting out of their ideas of what life should look like. I'll give you another example. In Argentina, for it's quite common that someone middle class would have a, I don't know, a nanny or
Hmm.
a cleaner that goes, if not daily, but quite frequently to their houses and helps with stuff, right? It's quite common for people to have a, a, a house that has a relative size, let's say, and to have a car and go to their work on a car.
Hmm.
All of those things in London are just millionaire level, right? It's
Hmm.
not middle class level. So you need to um, redefine your relationship with those markers of success because you will first be, it's much more affordable, for example, to travel to Europe because, you know, tickets are cheap than to get your kids on private education
Hmm.
or get private health or things like that, right? So those are, if you come with a certain idea of this is what my life would look like because that's what my parents' life looked like in the country I was born, you might just hit a wall when the realities of the country you moved into make it difficult.
Yeah, and what you're saying resonates a lot, not just like with my own story, but also with people that I serve, like through coaching. There is so much of the blueprint that becomes, you know, um, that no longer fits the same way. And so then there is both the process of learning what is possible and at the same time of meeting yourself in that context and like what is it that you want to need given that environment. One thing that I wanted to ask you related to that, especially you mentioned, like you come from Argentina, you're in the UK, you've been in the US as well. And related to this question is like how have these experiences shifted your perspective on both what was expected but also possible for you?
Well, that's a great question. I've grown so much through this experience. And I feel like I've taken important bits out of everywhere that I've been. When I was first in the US, I was studying back then. It was a semester abroad. And that was my first glimpse of living somewhere else. It was my first look into how other people live their lives and to how life was like in a different country. And a lot of things shocked me. One thing that shocked me was just the sheer amount of opportunity that was available for people in the US, for example. I was lucky enough to do that semester abroad at GW in Washington, D.C. So I was in the very heart of, the country's political capital, right? And my classmates were doing things like a summer internship at the IMF or, these kind of things that for me sounded like straight out of a movie. Like I, in my head, you had to be like a supernatural being to be in those places to achieve those milestones. And here I was talking to people. I was getting the same grades that I was getting. That was like, you know, flesh and bones, and they were doing those kind of things. So that got me started into thinking, wait a minute, I could be doing that. If I wanted to do this and be
Mhm.
in these places, maybe the only thing that I need to do is just be there, right? So that was definitely this start of like shifting my mindset about things.
It's interesting because, you know, I'm calling you from the neighborhood, but that resonates a lot, especially, you know, like coming from a space or a household where, you know, like we are like first generation, or like we decided to make the move. It kind of like expands the understanding of what's possible, but also forces you to redefine a lot of the rules that you had thought, you know, like that were part of what success looked like you were saying, or what is possible, how should, you know, how you should go about like basic things regarding like etiquette or even money or stuff like that. So, on the flip side, what do you feel has been one of your biggest joys as part of this path?
I found it a very rewarding moment a couple of years ago when I was able um to to buy my house.
Hmm.
Obviously going through the whole process of getting a mortgage and all the paperwork. There's a very real adulting moment. Again, talking about learning how things work in a different country. When you have to go through those very bureaucratic moments, um, it, that's an Italian you're learning, right? And to do it on my own in two aspects, on my own financially, because that was 100% bankrolled by my own efforts here, but also without being able to go for advice or contact or that kind of like local network that I would have had
Hmm.
back at home, right? What you were talking earlier, were asking me about like the challenges. One of the challenges is that you have to completely rebuild your network for even basic stuff like um I don't know, having someone that can help you with um putting together stuff in the house, or
Hmm.
giving you a ride if you don't have a car, or taking care of you if you're sick. Like you have to rebuild all the things that are very basic and you take completely for granted when you're in the place you were born, and suddenly um you rely on your friends, you rely on um ev- the things that you built for yourself in this new place, but it's nothing of that can be taken for granted. You have to grow all that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, congratulations, because that's a huge milestone. And second, you know, I can imagine like it's in my mind as a question, but I can imagine like people listening to being like, okay, so how did you make it happen? And I guess like the first question is like, what was the first step for you when you were like, okay, I think this is what I'm going to be doing, and you found yourself, it's like, well, how do I go about this now?
Yes. So I'm a very structured person,
Hmm.
and I don't know if that always comes through, but in my head, my goals come with plans, right? Usually I struggle having a clear goal, but once I get a clear goal, I have no trouble executing it because I'm the person that goes and creates a spreadsheet and like
Hmm.
puts milestones and timelines and like kind of like works through it.
Yeah.
So when I, for a very long time in my life, I had milestones such as changing jobs or getting promoted or um, whatever that may be. And the way I go about it is very systematic. I make a list of people that could help me achieve the goal. I make a list of I don't know, the requirements that I want that next milestone to have.
Hmm.
And finally, I put myself some timelines for it, right? So well, by when do I want to have redone my CV, or by when
Hmm.
do I want to have applied to these many places? And it was the same thing when I finally decided that I wanted to buy a house here in London. Like the first step was just making that as a conscious decision,
Hmm.
and I'm making some trade-offs about like what was that going to look like, right? Obviously, like it's it has all and it's really funny when talking about um, the challenges people have when they
Hmm.
move and reformulating that idea of success. with the UK especially, there's so many there's so many like concepts that people have in their minds about like what life in the
Hmm.
UK looks like.
Yeah.
Um, I've recently watched this series called Too Much. It's that's by Lena Dunham,
On
and
Netflix.
on Netflix, and she does it so perfectly.
Hmm.
Where I'm not going to spoil it too much, but basically, the American like protagonist has in her head of like, oh great, I'm going to. They asking me to go to London. I'm going to live
Hmm.
like in Downton Abbey, right? And
Yeah.
oh, I live in a place called something estate. It's going to be like a stately home. No, dear. If you're in London and the place where you live is called something estate, it's like this massive building built for two people in the 60s, and where you'd be lucky if you don't get like stabbed or something. I'm exaggerating, but that's
Yeah.
basically kind of like the reality she goes through in the series,
Yeah.
and that's like spot on because like it's a lot of people that think, oh, I'm going to move to, let's say, to the US, and I'm going to be living in like a California mansion. I'm going to move to London, and I'm going to be walking distance from Buckingham Palace and drinking tea with the Queen every, well, not the Queen now, but you know what I mean. Um, and yeah, so you have to adapt to things. But after you make that change, then just open an Excel spreadsheet. That
Yeah.
would be my my suggestion.
So, so let me take a step back and ask you this question. We talked about this a little bit as part of our conversation so far, but what would you say is your current definition of success?
Um, I think that the best definition of success is to lead a life where you can, when you take stock of what you have, you can feel comfortable that you don't have any major regrets in like having given your best and having taken all the chances that you could have had, and if not, to be doing something to correct it. I think, you know, that's what you need to call it success, right? It's not necessarily about a number or something shiny that you can like show everyone else, but rather, are you feeling happy with your own choices? I think that's the most important measure of success.
Are you?
Yes, I think pretty much. If I look back, I have very few moments where I think, I wish I would have chose the other path.
Yeah. What do you feel has helped you get there?
I'm a very resilient person, and I think that part of that mindset of growing up in the family I did, I grew up listening to the stories from mostly from my mom's parents about what it was like to um, live through, civil war, to live through, these really difficult conditions. I've heard all the story about the migration, and that really made me put things into perspective from a very early age. I've always felt like very lucky that they have walked all of that road for me, so that my road was so much easier. That was a definite driver, thinking I almost like owe it to them to try my best um and be able to continue the legacy.
Yeah. Um, that's really powerful, and at the same time, I can like deeply connect with. And I don't know if it's been your experience, but growing up, you would like hear I would hear the stories about, how there were like all the fears of a scarcity, and there was like very little food that people had to, divide in a family of 12, for example. And so, like the previous generations kind of like coming to Argentina and figuring out how to build, and then seeing uh those very subtle but like impactful practices and habits that we would develop. Like my mom would always joke about, making sure that the cupboards were like full of food, because you never know. You never know what can happen. But it was like very much like my grandparents' mindset of like, you need to make sure there's always food because there will be a time where there might not be.
Yes, absolutely. And you know what? Just being able to um, do without, being able to say, you know what? Yes, I think the one thing that it's been really hard for me is actually to enjoy the journey a little bit more instead of always thinking about like it's really hard to be able to use that scarcity mentality for what it's good for,
Mm-hmm.
and also to pause it or like not listen to it when it's not helpful, right? Because like the flip side of it is that if you're always thinking about the glass half empty, then you're missing out on some good opportunities as well.
Mm-hmm.
And a story comes to mind. You know, you were talking about regrets earlier. Right after when I came here to study,
Mm-hmm.
the first thing on my mind was like, need to find a job to stick around a bit longer. So that was a big focus area for me while studying my master's here. Um, and I was quite successful. I got two job offers before I finished my degree. And one of my very few regrets is that I took that offer based on partially fear. It was a very conservative choice.
Mm-hmm.
I choose a senior insight role at Nielsen.
Mm-hmm.
That was very similar to what I've been doing before. It was a job that I knew. It had some sort of seniority in the title. And I thought, well, this just goes well with what I've been doing before. If this doesn't work out, at least I have like this milestone in my resume. The job I turned down was a very junior entry level role at Bloomberg, which sounded very exciting, but in my head, it just opened all these questions around, well, what if it doesn't work out and suddenly I'm unemployed in London with like a kind of like a support role as the last thing that I've done. If I had like a different mindset, like a more adventurous mindset,
Mm-hmm.
maybe a less risk averse mindset, I would have thought, honey, like finance is where things are at here in London. This
Mm-hmm.
is just a lot of opportunities, a lot of optionality, a lot of open possibilities that can come from this. You never know what could be next, right? But in that moment, I wasn't able to think it that way. I was very much in my, let's make sure that things are as stable as possible.
Yeah. And I was like, to validate your past self, like it makes complete sense though too, because you know, sometimes we underestimate how courageous we are when we are in the middle of it, and that means that also we expect more from ourselves, even when, sometimes what we need is a little bit more comfort and familiarity, right? And so, like, you were already taking such a huge leap that, it makes sense that it might have felt more uncomfortable to kind of like go that route. And so, like, you chose something that felt more familiar within all that change. And at the same time, something that you just mentioned about, like the understanding the market and like where things were at in that specific context, that ties into, what we were discussing about the culture and the importance of kind of like understanding where you're at, like how things are moving there, and getting more of that information as you navigate that transition. This also connects to my next question, which would be, what is something that you have done that you would advise people not to do now?
I think that that is the one thing I would advise people not to do, right? Like make all those decisions, or I would say, the thing that I could have done differently is to understand the local market a bit better. And I think that in my first couple of years, I developed a really terrific network of fellow Argentinians.
Hmm.
I still, one of my strongest networks here is or other Argentinian um, expats. However, it took me a really long time to make inroads with the locals. And I think that that's always, if you ask anyone that has moved to a different location, most people would say the same. It's sometimes really difficult um, to generate closer relationships with people that are already, in the place where they've always been. Um, and I think that what I could have done maybe as a midway solution would have been lean on more on the staff at the university, perhaps. So I think that, or even like going to Reddit. I don't know. I think that looking continue to open your mind and hear about other opinions is super important, especially in those early years where you're still developing your own opinions.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, and connected to this, like you mentioned spreadsheets and plans. So, of course, I have to ask you, what would you, for anyone listening who might be either interested in moving to the UK, specifically London, or even, like they just landed and they don't know, like where to start, what would be a piece of practical advice that you would have for them?
For me, one of the most critical things that you can do again is to develop those networks. There's one of the great things about London and many of the other cosmopolitan cities that people usually move to is that there's so many other people that have walked in your shoes very recently. First and foremost, most of us are very approachable. Like if anyone at all reaches out to me on LinkedIn or wherever medium and says, "Hey, this is what I'm going through. I want to pick your brain," my answer would be always yes, right? And I've found so many people that have helped me that and I was just reaching out to them on LinkedIn or after an event, I thought a speaker was particularly interesting, and I would message them or send them an email. There's so many people out there that are super open to help you that the first advice would be do not be shy and reach out politely and keenly to people, and because most of them will help you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious, like, what is one story from that advice that you have implemented that has stuck with you? Like someone that you decided to reach out to that has like stuck with you since then.
There have been so many. One of the closest stories is like started even before I landed, and this is very random. That's I was like looking like at different universities in London and trying to get more information about them, and I landed on a testimonial for one of these universities done by a Argentinian woman, and I was like, "Oh, this is so cool!" And for some reason there was a I'm not sure if I contacted her on LinkedIn or if there was an email on that testimonial. But anyway, I just like reach out to her and say like, "Hey, I'm just like read your testimonial about this university. This is what I'm thinking about." Like it was like a very candid, just like cry for help. And she replied to me. She was super nice. We had a call when I was back in Argentina. She was super encouraging, just telling me to apply and go and do things. And I still talk to her to this day. She's become a bit of like a mentor. We've met here in London a couple of times for a coffee. She told me all about her career at Google. And now she's moved to a different country. And whenever she comes back, like we talk and we keep each other posted on our careers. And it's been like a really unexpected but wonderful relationship that all started from this kind of like cold emailing um, approach. Yeah.
And something that I love about your story is like I make a point of always talking about networking as less of kind of like the transactional, like one off, and more as the way I think about it, like my working definition is like it's a vehicle for building relationships that expand our understanding of what's possible, and like support one another. And it feels like, yeah, you found that testimonial, you reached out, and then like you build a bond that continues to, sustain and grow over time, even across borders now.
Yes. And one important thing is I used to be the person thinking, obviously because I was younger, I would my doubts would creep and say like, this person is like wasting their time helping me. What's in it for them? Like they're obviously going to say no. And that is a very narrow way of thinking about it because I absolutely agree with you. This is about building relationships. Usually networking fails where you do something like, hey, can you get me a job to someone that you don't know? Like, that's not networking. Like, I don't know what that is. And, but like, just an open, like, request for what the other person can give, right? It could be information. It could be like an introduction. There's just so many things that could be like really easy for someone else to just give to you. And then you never know when the shoe's going to be on the other foot, right? Um, we've gone through some very wild, you know, instability in a lot of the employee markets. I've seen former managers that have been in the position of asking me for either a recommendation or a contact or like a like on their new development that they're trying to get, um, more exposure for. So in the great scheme of things, you can be definitely valuable as well to the person you're reaching out to.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of that, um, I'm going to like connect this with like the value of our past, present, and future selves. So if you met the version of you who decided to move abroad today, what would you like them to know?
I mean, I would love her to give that reassurance that I'm always looking for, the reassurance that things will be okay.
Hmm.
Just to say, don't worry, it works out, you know? And I think that just to enjoy the ride a little bit more. I think that's something that I wish, if I could have maybe myself from 10 years time come and meet me tomorrow. If she could tell me everything will be fine and just enjoy the ride, I think that it's something that I would still need to hear today.
What do you feel helps you as you're navigating the ride?
I think that I have some very strong core values that I've developed early on in my life. And and that has helped me, keep a North Star. You know, from hard work and curiosity to lifting others as well. Um, I think that I've never been at in this journey to become rich and famous or hit one of those um perhaps more shallow
Hmm.
milestones. Um, it's always been like a very internal journey for me, and I think that that helps to be grounded when things look a bit uncertain.
Thank you so much. Before we wrap up, what is, if anything, like a piece of, advice or any final words that you would like to share with our listeners?
I think that the final piece of advice that I'd love to leave people with is this idea that all of us have a lot more to offer that we probably think. And I think that we we're in a a very weird time where everyone will need to reinvent themselves time and again in the coming years. So having that flexible, open mindset um, and just persevering through the challenges is going to be, I think, the main differentiator of people doing well and achieving their goals and people really struggling. So keep that in mind and find that things that gives you drive to go forward.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your time, Vero. I'm very excited to share this conversation with others. It's always a pleasure every time that we meet up.
Thank you. I really much enjoyed it. Hope everyone listening has picked a couple of good tips.
Thank you. That is all for today. My name is Dr. Analia Gomez Vidal, and I thank you for joining us today on Lucky to Be Here. If you liked this episode, please make sure to rate and review and subscribe wherever you're listening. You can also sign up to our newsletter using the link on our show notes to access the video version of our episodes. To learn more about the work that I do to support bold career explorers across countries through coaching and community, please visit agvservicesllc.com and follow AGV Services LLC on LinkedIn and Instagram. I'll see you next time.